Today is the 1st of November 2018. On the 1st of November 2011, my mother passed away, left this life. She died of a condition called motor neuron disease. If you're an American, you'll know it as Lou Gehrig's disease. She was 67 years old. She was diagnosed 7 months earlier, 2011. First signs of it had come about a year or so earlier, where her foot hadn't stopped working so nicely. She's a very fit lady, very fit, very active in her community. She died with a project incomplete. The project was to put a one-way mirror in the police station, one-way glass in the police station, so that rape victims didn't have to face the guy they said who did it. What's the word for that? The accused. It's not yet 6 o'clock. I have been awake for maybe a couple of hours. I just feel a little bit sleepy this morning. My throat hasn't fully recovered from my five cities of the Globe Light tour. So I'm not trying to affect a kind of Godfather thing here. It is an emotional thing. I sometimes think about whether to trouble people with it. Good morning, I see someone's dropped in. And on my YouTube channel, then, I hadn't, until just the other day, I hadn't let anybody know that I know, really. None of my friends list, as it were, know about this or knew about this YouTube channel, because when I set it up earlier this year, I didn't really want to drag my past with me. I just wanted to start something clean, because it is the psychology of having your past people talking to you in your head going, you're an idiot. Or even my closest friends from my growing up writing to my wife saying that I needed medical attention and help because I was losing my mind. So I needed to break away from all of that. It does mean that, and I'm very grateful for the fellow humans, brothers and sisters, who are kindly making comments, nice comments and helpful comments, and putting good energy into the work that I'm doing. Excuse me. I'm grateful for that, really grateful for that. So I was weighing up whether or not to talk about my mom's passing, because some people aren't all that interested in some of those things. For me, if you've heard me talk a little, then you may have heard me say that my dying mother couldn't get me to take a God or Jesus or any of those sort of biblical ideas that I'd been fed as a youngster. So I think that my mother's name was Elizabeth, and I think that she comes up quite often because of how influential she is in this and how valuable I think it is to share with people. That, I'm not, I don't come from that kind of, I just followed along with the biblical stuff, or I just fell in line, as it were. I mean, I think some people, when you talk about flat Earth, they think that you've always thought that the Earth was flat and that you just rejected science outright from day one. Now, I can talk about how that played out for me, but of course I I only seriously started looking at the flat Earth 3.5 years ago now. Not quite 3.5 years ago, I suppose. But my mother's condition, the motor neurone disease, sets something off in me that starts the ball rolling, that ends up here. So it's 7 years today since she left. I was a few hours too late. I never quite made it in time back to South Africa for her last breath. She was 4 hours dead by the time I made it there. But, you know, the story preceding that is pretty incredible, really. And I think that if you've got a little bit of time, you might find this interesting. And, you know, for other folks who are, like I was, bumbling along through life, uncertain. I was, 43, 44 at the time that my mom was diagnosed. So, man, I hadn't really made an awful lot of my career in the government. I'd had some difficulties with management. I was a change manager at the time. Yeah, I think that was the title, change management. And a member of staff that I'd been like really helpful with, you know, really good to her. I'd given her sister a job or helped her sister out of like a mental health problem into full-time employment with my team in the local government arena that I was working in. But misunderstanding between me and this other girl, the sister, in a meeting goes awry, and she takes the wrong kind of end of the stick and accuses me of bullying her. I think I learned later that it was more like out of defense that she said, oh, he was, you know, verbally bullying me. Now, those who know me know that I can talk in a pretty strident way. And in this case, you know, the girl was someone who I'd had a long-standing, you know, work relation, nothing any sort of physical or anything like that, you know, but just a long-standing kind of work relationship over a few years where I'd sort of had to hear some of the difficulties of her personal life and helped her out here and there with the odd travail. But on this day and this time, it was just, the situation was created that I was accused of bullying her in a meeting, and that escalated into me getting sacked. It took them like 4 months. I was suspended for a long period of time while they built a case and sacked me, and then overturned the sacking the very next day when I appealed it. It went up to a more senior person in the organization, or some assistant director or something, and they looked at the case, called me up and said, yep, there's no case to sack you here, but you said you were interested in leaving. We'd be keen for you to take that offer. And I was like, I'm on my way. And I tried to do a little bit of, I did a bit of, what do they call it, consulting for a few years with the help of a friend who was a senior consultant out in this space. But it wasn't really going anywhere for me, and I just realized I just didn't fit in the government space more and more. And so things weren't going so great for me. I wasn't very popular with my family because my career wasn't in any sort of shape, and yeah. Then, my mom phones me up, my dad and mom phoned me up, unusually, because I wasn't, I was a bit of a black sheep boy, and I wasn't good at communicating back to South Africa all that much. And my mom phones me up and says, I think there's something wrong. I've had a bunch of tests. My foot isn't working right. There's one more test, and then if that fails, it's something called ALS or MND, motor neuron disease. And if that's the case, Dave, then I don't have many years left. That was a pretty shocking thing. You know, a few weeks later, the final news came that it was this awful condition. Andrew and I started doing a bunch of research into it. And so begins a story that I start writing a blog about. I started writing a blog thanks to a pal at work. I was working up in Enfield at the time, in council. Oh no, I had to have left there. But I had pals there, and I'd gone to see a pal from that time, and he said his mom had died of the same condition, and he wished he'd wrote a blog and kept a log of it. So I went out and bought an expensive video camera and started writing a blog called A Month with Mom. I think it's probably still on Blogspot. And I was writing it on a little BlackBerry, and it cost me £600. My phone bill when I got home, mother trucker thieves, £640 for sending a few BlackBerry messages up at night. I don't even think there were photos, no video. And I realized how the insurance industry was completely walking away from my mother despite a lifetime of paying insurances, because the condition didn't fall into certain parameters. It wasn't seen as, I don't know, did they say it wasn't like a, anyway. The medical industry did not shower itself in any glory whatsoever. And yeah, I can't remember the exact order of things, but through the course of the 6 or 7 months, I have 3 occasions to be with my mother. The last occasion, she was so broken. This is in early October. I had to spend 30 hours in a Cairo airport, man. The Arab Spring was kicking off, and I was going to see my mom, and I had like a week or 10 days with her, but a day I lost in Cairo. That was a crazy story. But I spent time with my mom. She's broken. She can't breathe for herself. That's not quite true. She can't clear her throat. She can't expectorate. She can't swallow. And there is no medics around. You know, if there's equipment being arranged, it's being arranged by my wife, my sister, and myself. My dad was falling apart a bit, but you know, we were making things happen. Her care happened. Her care was 24/7. You know, the medical industry, again, had pills and stuff, but very little else. It's quite an interesting story about how I get drawn right back into the trenches. I was right back on the front line, you know, and my entire existence for about 10 days, maybe only a week, just came right down to, you know, keeping my mother alive. And then eventually agreeing with her that if you couldn't go on much longer, then we might have to find some other way to help her end the life. Still no God for me, by the way. No belief in anything else other than she's going to die. And that'll be that. That's what I thought at the time. But I was on a job assignment and at a doing actually quite lucrative for me at the time, like £450 a day, crazy money. But it was a rare piece of work, and I had about legitimately I could work for another 10 or 12 days before the contract ended, and that I would be able to kind of generate that absolutely essential income, to pay the rent and whatnot. So I came back to England, but on the proviso that my wife would fly out and swap places with me, because there was no one else who was going to care for my mother that I could think of or had at my disposal than my wife. So we swapped places. She came out, and after about 24 hours, I left her, showed her exactly all the things she needed to do. And I came back. That was the middle of October. And at the last day of October, the 31st of October, Andrea phoned me up and said, "You need to come now. This is it. She's at the end." And I just finished, I'd worked through the Saturday and the Sunday preceding, finished writing up this report. So I was kind of good to go anyway. I jumped on a plane, the very next plane I could get, and as the plane touched down in Johannesburg, I turned on my phone and it rang. And Andrea is on the phone saying, "Hey, where are you?" "I'm just pulling into the airport right now. In Johannesburg, I've still got to get a flight down to Durban. It's going to take me a few more hours." She said, "Hey, hurry up, your mom's going." The plane had just about stopped at its stand, and just as people were, when the seatbelt light goes off, just before that all kicked off, the phone rings again, and my mom, Andrea, says, "Say goodbye. Your mom's going now." So for a few minutes there, I said my final goodbyes to my mother, until Andrea came back on the phone. Said she was gone. Just a funny little aside comes to mind. I was in such a bad way when I went through the passport control office. The lady was so clearly moved by my state of distress that she did something wrong with my passport. So when it came time for me to leave a month or so later, there was a big fuss at the passport office because I hadn't been checked in correctly. Crazy. So my mom was 67 and vital lady. As I said, she was very involved in her community and never managed to finish that final project. They were looking for such a little bit of money, like 100,000 rand, which in today's pounds terms is, I've got to say, like 5,000 pounds or something ridiculous. To build in this wall and this protection, and that ladies from not only that town but surrounding neighborhoods and returning towns would also get the advantage of that one-way mirror. You see, in some cultures, they even insist that the victim touch the perpetrator on the shoulder. But and we're not that far from that. My mom was very keen on and this is one of the funny things about the new South Africa, isn't it? Is you'd think this is how the mind can work, is that, the majority of the rape victims in South Africa are actually black African skin, African ladies, black. That's the majority of the rape statistics come from that community. So you would have thought that when a wonderful human being like Nelson Mandela came to power, he'd make sure all of those little nasty idiosyncrasies of the apartheid era was set aside and improved upon. But no, my mum campaigned for 6 years just to get that little bit of money and get the police to kind of do that thing, put that one bit of money aside. They don't have to even put the money, the money would have been given to them. It wasn't ever going to come out of their budget for donuts or for wasting resources on ransacking innocent people's homes for growing plants. I now see people talk about how motor neuron or neural pathway conditions are the consequence of plaque or buildup of heavy metals, toxins from within our environment, toxins that are intentionally in our environment against cleaning mechanisms, pine oil and other sorts of means of distilled water, for example, other means of extracting this poison and toxin from these parts of your body, washing the neural pathways clean. Hey, all of these things we know, but I knew none of it. And the medical industry knows none of it. I mean, they might talk about furring and plaquing and stuff like that of these things, but they don't really, and they're thinking in a materialist way about these things too. I think of it like if we're electrical, any electrical system will work badly if it's got a little bit of moisture. It's got an arcing, two bits of a little bit of aluminium joining two tiny bits of electrical circuit that shouldn't be joined. Yes, you see these twitches and twerks and strange things happening, or things shutting down, or getting short-circuited and no longer working. In the case of motor neuron disease, that's what's happening. Short-circuiting, and my mom would get these little vesiculations, these like vibrations through the muscle as things were just like short-circuiting and then burning out. Oh my God. Other than for actually dead bodies, I've never seen a body so broken while the person is still alive. Our mother's body was broken. And she went from being a vital lady in less than a year, a vital human being, to just a bag of bones and skin. Unable to do anything but... That bell I got hanging there is what I attached to her wrist before I left. In the days preceding me departing and Andrea coming and taking care of her, her health had become so weak, and we were struggling to find a means of her communicating that she needed us to suction her or give her any attention. So I attached that bell to my mother's wrist because she could just about move her wrist, and that was all she needed to do to call her. But that is a horror show that had me back in the trenches. 19-year-old boy. I was made to go to war, right? We're all propagandized to be the soldiers that we are. I see it today with these young school children going to school in their business tie and suit. By the time you're 15, 16 here, they want you already in your little monkey suit, your little army suit, ready to go and work in the city, ready to go and work for the insurance broker, or go and fill their call center with chatter. In my case, we were prepared for a communist invasion. And I just went along and did my bit. But when I went and did my bit, I did it to the best of my ability when it came down to it. Yeah, I might have been naughty during training. I might have thought the whole lot was a load of crap. But when the bombs start falling, you've got two choices. You lead or you run. A few weeks ago, you won't know this, but in my case, the war that I went into was mechanized warfare, armored warfare, tanks, troop-carrying armored vehicles fighting against each other. I was a crew commander. Beneath my feet, down there, below the turret, was the driver. His name was also David, actually, in my case. And next to me, on my right, a guy called Herbert Zeely. Herbert Zeely found me about 1 month ago, maybe 2 months ago now. Yeah. And you know what he wrote? When he wrote to me, he said, Dave, people have asked me throughout my life, would I go back to war? And I've always said no. Unless Dave was next to me. That's what he said to me. After 30 years of not having heard from the man, that's what he said. I wrote a book about this. And I wrote this book without having the driver or the gunner at my side to verify what I was saying. But I knew one day they would come out of the woodwork. So what I was going to say had to be, it had to be right, otherwise it wouldn't match with closely enough with how they remembered things. I mean, to be honest, I shunted all the army stuff away. I had no interest in the army. I did my service as I was required by law. But after that, I walked away and I never paid any attention to it until all of this started coming out 5 years ago. Or 6 years ago. It was after my mom's death that in 2012, I started looking at the Facebook military things and so on, and I think that's where it all sort of came back. But the point is that when I went to war completely, and we were solid at what we did. I think I've lost my feed. Maybe not. Anyway, it's frozen up for me. I'll just carry on talking. I think it's still picking up the audio. I did absolutely, yeah. Audio's working, cool, thanks. I did what I could to keep me and my crew and my fellow squadron mates alive through that. And but that character, that this is interesting, I think. So, sorry, I lost my thread. You'll have to skip that a little bit. This is interesting. After your country is done with you, well, I hope that, actually no, I hope that soldiers get to hear this little clip. But after your country is done with you, the hero or the whatever, your country will dispense of you and forget you. It may say, oh, we're going to have a Remembrance Day march for you once a year. And I actually ended up going along for a few years, 3 or 4 years maybe, feeling increasingly uncomfortable about being reconnected to all of that pomp and circumstance and hierarchy and honoring, people because of their rank and their willingness to go along and do the bidding of some higher authority. Oh my gosh. That's another story altogether. But when my country was done with me and those around me, it spat us back out into civilian street and said, off you go. Good luck. And something that I realized then over the years was that none of that incredible experience, that amazing skill set and courage and those things that we'd had to display in bucket loads in 1987 in Angola. None of that counted for anything once we got out in the street. In fact, people weren't even interested in what we'd been doing. So it's not long before you lose your shit. I'm having to pick up, whatever job I can get, and going and sitting inside of an office and punching a keyboard really doesn't seem like much fun after you've been, living in a tent or living out in the field for over a year and, getting by on incredible amounts of adrenaline and self-determination. And I was leading troops at war, at the age of 19, and at the age of 20, I was considered not good enough to work on a production line, just about good enough to work on a production line. I came over to the UK on a trip. I went over to America, struggled to get work over there in America because they were already very fussy about being out of town. But in the UK, recruitment. So this is my CV. It's obviously not very long, but I was, considered good enough to lead troops in battle, and et cetera, et cetera. We'll get you a job on a production line here. All you need to do is bash these pork pies out of their tins, out of their trays, and then move them onto that. Do you think you're going to be able to cope with that? And so it starts. You're right at the bottom of the thing, and in my case, at this time, most of the work that was coming our way was no longer kind of, if you went into, go back to the army, you had to go into an office. And, the traditional work for the male, I'm not particularly, I never came up as particularly mechanical. I was more academic. And even then, after the age of 10 or 12, I suppose I really switched off academia. I now know why. So it really, there was nowhere, it was like square peg and round hole. And I think that a lot of guys are having a square peg, round hole it nowadays. That's why you see so much obesity and boys becoming girls, They're doing girls' work. When I came up, the idea of learning a typewriter, when I was in high school, man, typewriters were for girls. Now, of course, I think that was, an oversight. If I'd learned to be a typist at a young age, then, it wouldn't have taken me so long to get handy with a keyboard. I'd probably be much quicker now, but who knew? Who knew? Anyway, the point is that I won't belabor my career, but I will say that over the next, even though I spent a spell as a doorman in Cape Town, which is how I came to have that altercation with that solicitor dude who just got whacked in front of his children while dropping them off at school, man. That's insane. And this is a guy who, who took a dark path. And we could see that then. My incident with him was 1994, so that's 25 years ago. I could see then that he was headed on a dark path, and not one that, even though I was obviously skirting around the nightlife at that time, I was only doing it for the money, I needed it to pay I needed money. So it was how I was earning money at the time, but I've always been on a path of light, yeah, but I was asleep. I'd been put to sleep by a system that had no place for me and that just wanted me to stay back in the box. And I think this, my brothers and sisters, is where most of us have come from, and where most people are, is they've been seduced into the fluoride box of television and, you know, the security of, you know, their material existence that's become so important to them, you know. I see that, there is fear in everybody because it's like they've got to hang on to this thing. Man, I don't want to get personal and name people, but there are people around me, you know, neighbors or whatever, who are, you know, exemplifying that. You know, they would much rather keep their curtains closed and their head below the parapet than start to speak against the system for fear of something. I think that while I was a Darwinian, this is my only life, this is all I have is now, and so on, I did fear death more. Now I know that this is a transitional, this is a school for you to come and learn, and if you don't learn, if you stay in that box, then there is obviously a ramification, a ripple effect, a knock-on that will be, you know, into the esoteric, the unknown, and the supposition here. And I'll say that, but you know, it kind of, if you think about the intention behind the system that has held us low, then there is definitely a value to it, and that value must be in the beyond this experience. Like, do you come back? Do you come back as a something lower? Do you come back in the karmic line? I mean, this ex-boyfriend of my wife, who was executed the other day, he had been pulling such a karma along with him, a dark karma. You know, his mother had committed suicide at a young age. His wife killed herself a few years ago, also suicide, hanging or something. And you know, this is the kind of the darkness that we have surrounding us. And you know, the karma. If the karma you don't address, then does it come back? You know, have I been dealing with karma through my lifetime that my father's have passed down the line to me? Is that why it's harder for a rich man to get to heaven and pass a camel through the eye of a needle? You know, what karma are we passing down the line and having to address? I don't know, but I think there is, for me now, there is certainly a bit of value other than the value in this life. My life now is so remarkably different from the life that I had 7 years ago, as a consequence of the things that have happened to me, as an advantage that I had from the energy that my mother's passing gave me. The kick in the pants that I needed to get me going and get me back in to action and start to tidy myself up, clean myself up, mind, body, and soul. And so the journey has been for 7 years now, because when I carried my mother's stiff body out of that house later that day, I vowed I was going to do something. I didn't know what. I didn't know anything, actually. I was still searching, but I started back from my own life, you know, and I started unpicking my own shit. And that meant I got the opportunity to purge my wartime story and experiences. And then from that, when I published that book, people were saying, you need to write another book. This is 2014, July, August 2014. I think the book is published around then. And I'm getting a lot of positive energy about having written this book. But so I think, okay, well, if I was to write another book, what would I write about? And the thing that troubles me most in the world, or did at the time, was religion. Because, I was not a believer in religion, and I saw how much religion was at war with the world. I had a massive argument with a Catholic pal on a book tour. Just that religion has caused so much heartache and horror. So that process, I started doing research on, then in 2014. I still wasn't working very much, actually. So I had a bit of free time, no money, but a bit of free time, and I started researching. And I came across what's his name? Not Stephen Hawking. Not Dawkins, the other guy. Shit. He wrote a book called... These I forget now. These guys are like the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Sam, what's it, Sam Smith or something? No, I forget now. Those names are all no longer so important to me. But I followed those guys for a while, and I was really honing my atheistic kind of anger at religion and the ridiculousness of all of that stuff, and their notions that there was some greater good in play. For me, all the warring in my lifetime and the horror of my mum's death and the system of corrupt, disgusting kind of insurance and inadequate, inept medical system, and how my mom had been treated by religion because she'd fallen pregnant out of wedlock, so they wouldn't let her even marry in a church. How her medical profession had found out that she was pregnant and kicked her off her midwifery course up in Dumfries in Scotland, back in the 60s. These are these wonderful, venerable institutions, so retarded in the way that they approach things. How angry I was with them. So my mother gave her life to these organizations, her church, her medical profession, and so on. And at the end, the medical profession were not that professional. I will say, to be fair, that the church that they went to, the lay preacher who tended to my mother and who put his arm around us at the time of her death, was a wonderful man, or is a wonderful man, and was good. And I think that it's always worth remembering that most people in the world just want to be good at what they do, good people, and so on. Most people in the world, think in terms of the establishment being benevolent and the establishment being the best that we can do, and having the best interests at heart of good humans and so on. So I think that most people come at their profession from that position. And so for that reason, you encounter wonderful human beings all along the way, just doing the best that they can in the situation that they have, with the knowledge and the information and the authority that they're given. But I was, obviously, I was incensed by that, and I was chasing religion, and I wanted to write a kind of a book on religion and the ills of religion. As a child, I knew that it was impossible to have two competing religions or three competing religions and for them all to be right. It just doesn't make sense. But now I was willing to accept that none of them were right, and that atheism, there being no God and just the Big Bang. That's where I was at, man. That is where I was at. That is where I was at. And then the Kurdish barber told me at the end of 2014 that he'd left Kurdistan because of ISIS and the insurrection, and this ISIS is being funded by America. That made me angry. I didn't believe that. And then a friend called Sean invites me to lunch in London and says to me, do you know that some fools think that 9/11 was an inside job? Well, I think I'd heard that once before, and on this occasion I was like, I'm already doing deep research. I'm already doing research. I'm going to pick this one up and have a look at it for myself. Really, look at it for myself. And by the next day, I was already in shock, because it was like there was enough information already to say, shit, you don't know squat about this. And so it starts to unravel. It all starts to unravel from there. And then I get this invite to speak at a military event in South Africa, the most high-profile military unit in South Africa, 32 Battalion. Incredible military pedigree, but also an incredible story of how a government can walk away from its people and just fuck them over at the drop of a hat. There's a real deep story about how these boys, a lot of them black guys, if those who don't know, this is not about a white story. This is about black Africans promised things, and then by a government, a white government in this case, and then completely dropped and treated like shit by the next government. And by the previous, by the way. I'm not exonerating the previous. Oh, no. No, that was all set up. And these poor lads are still, there's a story called Polokwane. You need to look into that if you're interested in this and maybe helping these guys out. But what's gone down there is another shameful story. And any military guy should pay attention to this, because, trust me, they're only stroking your dick because you're there doing their bidding. The moment you say no, they will ram that dick right up your ass. Trust me. So I get invited over to this, just to be a speaker or the speaker at this gala event for this unit, 32 Battalion. I can't afford to go there, but a friend kindly pays for the flight. I get out there, and that's when I came into contact with DMT. This Jewish pal of mine from a long time ago, from my days as a doorman, actually, in Cape Town, funnily enough. Yeah, Joey comes to me, he says, I got this DMT, do you know about the third eye? I'd only really recently started to kind of unpick the mysteries of the third eye. I knew very little about it, but it's like, you got to do this DMT. There's a documentary called The Spirit Molecule on YouTube. You should check that out. But it doesn't really prepare anyone, because the words that I say and the images that we create in Hollywood do not come close to the beauty, the splendor, the majesty of everything that is beyond this five sense world that we live in. There's 3 dimensions that we're in. So I have this 5-minute encounter with the creator, or with the creation, that I'd never ever believed was real. And that was a major turning point. And from then, the flat earth came to my attention. And since then, everything has gone crazy. Now, it seems like my little baby boy is awake. So I'm just going to finish the stream. And oh, okay. Okay. You know, my daughter's on the phone as well, from university. And my son's come downstairs. So I'm going to wrap this up. I'm going to say thank you for taking the time to listen to this heartfelt story about my mother, Elizabeth. And I think about her all of the time. I miss her very much, but I am grateful that her energy fuels me, and her life is partly what I honor when I go about doing the thing that I do, which is to help my fellow human to get through all of those challenges that have been set in front of us that are designed for some reason to hold us back from finding that way to the love. Because if you've not seen me talk on the DMT, and I have spoken about it before and probably will do again, but the DMT, all of that stuff, by the way, you're told to be frightened of by your religion. I was very frightened of that by my religion, but I overcame that fear, and I now know that the reason why they make you fear it is because if you know this, you will know that they're lying, and that you are the source. You know, the creation comes from you. So it's almost like you are indistinguishable from the creation, but in the human form you have an identity that we name, in this case, David. And I look like this, but I am intimately part of the creation, just like every other part of this creation. However, we are gifted a treasure or a power that most of the rest of the creation doesn't have, and that is to create things. Yes? Okay, I'll be there in a second, honey. We are given the opportunity to create something now. As the guy who just got whacked, I don't mean that disrespectfully, I'm very sad for his story and his children. Very sad. Very, very sad. It's awful. But he chose a dark path, and he created something awful. And that karma his children will carry. And you and I, each of us has the opportunity to create something beautiful. And that karma our children, our family, our neighborhood, perhaps, will carry. And in time, you can either be a world of gangsters or a world of people who love their creation and co-create something beautiful. So I dedicate this to my dear mother, Elizabeth. 7 years. And in 7 years, I've transformed my creation. So there's more to come. Have a super day. Thank you. Sorry, excuse my finger.